What's up and welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. Today we've prepped our juicy high elo solo queue tier list for you, so without any further delays, let's just get going. For the Baron lane we have Riven in the OP tier. Riven is infamous for her pressure. Level 1, she can almost beat anything that's in her way. The reason for that is rather simple. Her first ability in combination with the auto attacks make it really hard to out-trade her. So just in case you didn't know, her first ability is basically an auto attack cancel, which means she can auto attack first ability, and so on, and just beat you up. And the best thing about this, she can just get Conqueror stacked within a few seconds. Well, not even a few seconds, literally just 1 second to up to a maximum of 2. But how can you use that advantage to make the enemy literally rage quit? It's quite simple. All you have to do is sit on the wave and do nothing but last hit. If the enemy chooses to last hit, you will just beat them up. For example, think of an enemy Irelia. Most of the Irelia players out there will always use their first ability to get the minion last hits. If an Irelia does so, and Riven is next to a minion, well, the lane is quite over in an instant. Because all Riven has to do is what I've described to you in the earlier parts of this video already. And there's nothing the Irelia can do about this, apart from starting with a third ability and farming the creeps from range. As a consequence, Riven can just build up an easy slow push from wave 1 to wave 3 and then crash the third wave into the enemy tower. If the ally jungler is very aware of that and the enemy made a mistake on wave 1, well, you can just dive the enemy and he loses everything he has. Other than that, you can just walk into the river, get some deep vision, or maybe look for a mid lane play. But if you want to go for the most consistent idea, you just push the wave on wave 3 or basically crash it, go into the enemy jungle to place a ward, recall and enjoy the wave pushing into you again. Especially taking that mechanic into consideration, you can just tell your jungle to play around the wave that is pushing into you. Cause as a Riven you always have agency in lane, or let's say against the most champions out there. And while you have agency, you can determine how the lane is supposed to be played. And especially if you do the move from wave 1 to 3, you can determine what happens after. And after that, your jungle will just farm the opposing top laner with you hand in hand. And as the game goes on, you don't really become that much weaker. Obviously there are a few constellations of champions that make your life a bit harder, but you can itemize in a way that you just don't die. You have a lot of cooldown reduction and you just deal tons of damage anyway. And things get especially hard for the enemy team once you have your Gargoyle enchant on top of all your bruiser items. There's no way you can die. And now let's talk about another champion who has been quite ridiculed in the past, and he is still not one of the best champions whatsoever. And we have Singed in the C tier here. Singed struggles from one specific thing. His laning phase is absolutely awful. The reason for that is he cannot trade against most enemy Baron laners in most situations. And ironically, he is a better mid lane champion than he is a top lane champion, because the bruisers just beat him up with auto attacks and in the middle lane he could wave clear quite easily. Especially when Katarina was meta, Singed was not so bad in the mid lane. The reason here is simple yet again. Singed counters Katarina. You might laugh a bit, but Katarina can't do anything into Singed. Because once she gets close, she just gets grounded and flung around. And once the Katarina is stuck there without a Shunpo ready, well, she is quite useless. And whenever we go into teamfight situations, the enemy Katarina couldn't even do anything, because once she goes in, she gets grounded instantly and can't use her daggers anymore. And a Katarina who is stuck without any movement abilities is quite the easy target. And there's another rule for any Singed player. A Singed should never leash for his jungle. You might think that sounds a bit troll, but have you ever seen a Singed who is not in lane on level 1? Because if he can't push the very first wave, he cannot play at all. Because, look at it again, most top laners are super strong in terms of bruisers. Like they beat you up whatever they do. And if Singed doesn't get the wave killed early on, he can never get to level 2 first and can never contest anything. Cause whenever he gets close, he just gets beaten up. But now let's talk about what makes this champion viable. Once the Singed hits level 5 and has the Rod of Ages in his inventory, he has enough HP and resistances to deal with the enemy team. And once he's tanky enough with this, he can just run through them and poison them all to death. And he can also pull off his signature move if he is funny enough to do so. You might laugh at the funny here, but it looks kinda funny if you look at it. Because have you ever seen a Flash Protobelt Singed flip an enemy AD carry into your team who's then getting one shot in an instant? I mean, it's always nice to look at. And now after this, let's talk about our question of the day. What are your thoughts on Rod of Ages? Is this item balanced in the way it is, or does it need buffs or nerfs? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And now, this is the complete Baron tier list. Next up comes the jungle, and here we have Rengar in the 80 for the junglers. In case you didn't know, if you're going to contest the enemy jungle, make sure to walk into the river with 4 ferocity stacks on Scuttle spawn. With this, you'll be able to use your first ability 3 times. So even the fact that your champion got nerfed in terms of base damage will not change the situation in a way that you'll lose the fight. However, what has changed is the power of his clear. Previously he was able to do 4 camps before Scuttle spawn and walk into the river brush before the Scuttle even spawned. And the best thing, he had 4 ferocity stacks, so if the enemy walked close to him, he could just use the first ability, reset the ferocity stacks, and then gain the bonus ferocity stack from jumping from a brush. Then he gets to 4 stacks instantly again and well, has another first ability. And then nobody really could survive. For now you can still easily pull it off with just 3 camps, so don't you worry about that one. There's also a thing that a lot of players are not aware of. Rengar doesn't need to associate with the team. He can also mainly split push throughout the game as he destroys tower rather fast. And once the enemy comes, he can just ult away and escape from them. And the even more annoying fact about him is that even if he builds full damage, he can be rather tanky thanks to his second ability. But he is a champion that's rather weak early on, and this is Fizz in the A tier. Fizz jungle was overbuffed and then nerfed again. Because of his relative strength in the early game and his dependence on fleet footwork in the jungle, he needs to avoid the enemy jungle in most cases throughout the early game. It's just not worth the flip because you just don't win, you just lack the damage. However, once you hit level 5 you can one-shot most enemies thanks to his ultimate ability. And if there's one thing your champion loves, it's cooldown reduction. The more ability haste, the better, because with your third ability you can avoid anything and it's not called troll pull for nothing. So if you're mechanically competent enough, you can use your first ability and your third ability to make the grandest escape ever, or you just die while you fail everything. At least you can have a good laugh doing both. Now, let's look at our full jungle tier list. And now onto a champion that isn't really related to laughing, at least not if you face him. It's Zed in the middle lane for the S tier. Zed is quite the special champion. Everybody hates him and everybody loves him if they play him. The reason is, Zed kills every squishy in an instant, but how does it happen? Well, Zed is quite special in this scenario because Zed's third ability got a unique interaction in Wild Rift. Multiple hits deal extra damage rather than applying an increased slow like in the PC variant, which means he can have up to 2 shadows, so his third ability can hit the enemy 3 times. And if you hit the enemy 3 times with that ability, and the enemy is a squishy champion, you best believe it's going to blow up. And if things weren't bad enough, Zed cannot miss anything if he ults onto a target and auto-casts every single spell. It's just not possible. The only thing that could happen is the enemy pressing his hourglass. And similar to that, Zed is one of those champions that entirely change once they hit level 5. In the early game they cannot do much, like level 1 they can only poke, level 2 only poke again, and level 3 they can mainly look for an all-in if they're poked enough early on. However, with the level 5 he can just straight up kill you 100 to 0 if he has ignite and you don't have anything against him, like an exhaust or a ruby crystal or anything along those lines. A champion that also works similar to this is Diana. Diana also needs to maintain healthy from level 1 to 2. And on level 3 she can actively start trading if she is still healthy enough. And this champion is just not balanced in the way she is. She is just way too tanky for an AP assassin, so once you have the Rod of Ages, it's game over. Also, if you are really advanced with her, you can do some fancy trades. In lane you can do fast trades by hitting the wave and the enemy with your first ability. You may then dash to the enemy champion, pop your second ability for the shield plus an auto attack and then dash back to the marked minion to reset your third ability's cooldown. And once we get to team fights, you can use your ultimate to apply Moonlight to every champion that got hit, and then dash to everyone and then use the auto attack reset of your third ability to beat them up. So if you really want to, Diana is quite the mechanical champion if you want to deal extra damage. And now, let's take a look at our mid lane tier list. And now we talk about extra damage, and there's only one champion we can talk about, and it's Draven. And the funniest thing about Draven is that inting sometimes pays off on him, but it obviously depends on how many stacks he has. And once the Draven has enough AD, he'll just beat you up and there's nothing you can do about this, he just has too much damage. Draven is absolutely unbalanced in that regard, so if you always push forward, you'll rarely encounter trouble unless the enemy team sends the entire goon squad after you. And next to Draven in the OP tier is Brand. And similar to that, Brand is also known for something very specific. Brand is the suicidal version of Ziggs. In a teamfight, it's almost always enough to blow all your spells at once into the enemy team, if you can make sure everything hits. Then the enemy team is just going to explode because of all your damage, and the funny thing is, it is not even that obvious. Because once I played against the Brand, I didn't even notice I was hit by things. His ultimate just bounced to me and then his third ability as well, and then I just blew up. I was like, what? How? But there's also something you have to be aware of when you play him. Brand is rather squishy, so you have to be careful about how you play in lane. You also cannot follow most champions into the fog of war due to the relative tankiness of your champion. But other than that, he is quite fun and quite broken even after the hotfix nerf some time ago. And with that in mind, let's take a look at our full AD carry tier list. And speaking about nerfs, let's move on to the support role. This champion has been nerfed for specifically the AD carry role, but she was never played in the AD carry role, at least not in the higher ELO or the elite tier. At least not that I'm familiar of, because it's just bad. We got Senna in the OP tier. Senna is one of the most flexible and broken champions in the game. She can be played with so many different champions and always provides value. It is just insane. She gets so many souls if she wants to. There's also a little trick you can do with the jungle. Rather than leashing your jungle on the red buff, you can also leash your jungle on the Crux. But you might ask, why the Crux? Every Croc has the possibility of spawning a soul once it's killed. So if you're really lucky, and by lucky I mean really lucky, you can get like 6 or more souls from those mobs alone. That is a bit crazy. And there's also a neat trick if you use the Senna ultimate and the Locket combo. It is absolutely broken. She can single-handedly negate more than 800 damage as the game goes into later stages. Which is, if you play into an engage comp, quite helpful. Also, once you start casting Senna's ultimate, you cannot get interrupted anymore, so think about that. Another champion that's quite broken when it comes to support is Rakan. However, Rakan has to keep in mind something very specific. He has to relax in the early laning phase as he cannot reliably get in and out of trouble without having access to at least 2 abilities. However, if you play with the Zarya, you get some extra value from a second ability in lane, so this changes a bit. But once you get to level 3, you can do basically whatever you want. And once you hit level 5, you usually secure a kill if your team wants to make it happen. And it's just way too reliable and easy to pull off. And especially in the later stages of the game, Rakan is way too threatening as a champion. Once he catches you, you'll just die. You'll get knocked up and blasted by the enemy team. And with that out of the way, you may now look at the full support tier list. And that also wraps up our daily video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and sub to the channel to never miss one of those ever again. Catch you tomorrow.